Welcome to True Echo, where we uncover stories that touch the soul, stir the heart, and remind us that beneath the noise of the world, there's always a deeper truth waiting to be heard. Tonight's story begins in the gleaming heart of the Whitmore Conservatory, a place of chandeliers, champagne, and symphony, where tuxedos speak louder than kindness, and money often drowns out meaning. The occasion? A luxury gala, crowded with donors, socialites, and musical elites who had come not to listen, but to be seen. He shouldn't have been there. Sir, step away from the piano. You're making the guests uncomfortable. The voice belonged to Carson Holloway, a smug-faced vice president of the conservatory committee. He stared down at the man like he was dirt beneath polished shoes. The man, with his wrinkled thrift store blazer and unkempt beard, didn't even flinch. He stood by the grand Steinway piano, fingers brushing the polished black surface like one might touch a headstone, full of memory, reverence, and sorrow. "Please, before you embarrass yourself further," Carson sneered, his voice rippling through the ballroom like oil on water. A few guests snickered. A woman in a red gown whispered to her date, "Is this performance art?" Another said, "He looks homeless." Still, the man didn't move. He slowly lowered himself onto the piano bench, his movements stiff, deliberate, like his body was following muscle memory carved by time and trauma. From the back of the room, a young boy clutched his mother's hand. "He looks sad," the boy whispered. He was right. The man's eyes weren't defiant. They were full of loss, raw, quiet, unresolved. Eyes that had seen too many sunsets alone. Eyes that carried the burden of music unheard. "Security," Carson barked. "Remove him. Now." But before anyone moved, a voice rang out from the front row. "Let him play." The entire room froze. It was Eleanor Braithwaite. The widow. The donor. The soul of the conservatory. Her white gloves clutched the armrests of her chair, her expression unreadable. But her words were final. "I said," she repeated, "let him play." Reluctantly, Carson stepped back. The security guards halted. The guests shifted uneasily. And the man, still without a word, placed his hands on the keys. The first note was so soft it barely registered. A single trembling C, drawn out like a whisper. Then another. And another. At first, the room laughed. But then, it didn't. The notes formed a melody. And the melody carried something ancient. Haunting. Holy. The mockery died in their throats as the music unfolded like a confession. The man's hands moved with a gentle ache, fingers brushing the piano like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to this world. And as the song deepened, so did the room's stillness. A champagne glass shattered somewhere in the back. No one turned. The music swelled. The grief in it was unmistakable. Yet it didn't demand attention, it asked only to be felt. And everyone did. From the balcony to the banquet table, people sat still as statues, eyes glazed, chests tight, breath shallow. Eleanor's fingers gripped the edges of her seat. She leaned forward, her voice trembling. "He's playing Solace in G minor." Someone beside her frowned. "But that piece was never released." "It wasn't," she whispered. "My husband wrote it. For our daughter. After she died." The parchment had been kept hidden in her home for decades. A private composition. Never published. Never performed. Until now. And somehow, this stranger was playing it note for note. When the final tone fell like dust in sunlight, the room didn't erupt in applause. It couldn't. There was no clapping. No standing ovation. Only silence. Not empty silence. Sacred silence. The man stood. Slowly. His back curved not by age, but by burden. Without a word, he turned and walked toward the door. No one stopped him. No one dared. He reached the handle, but paused. His hand hovered, as though he wasn't sure the world outside would be able to hold the weight of what had just happened. "Wait, sir," a voice called out. The Gala's host, Roger Ellington, stumbled forward, eyes wide with confusion. Who are you?" The man turned slightly. Just enough for the room to glimpse the gray smoke in his eyes. "I'm no one," he said softly. "Just someone who remembered." Then he left. And the room, forever changed, let him. Eleanor Braithwaite stood. For a moment, no one knew what to do. She walked slowly to the stage, a woman shaped by grief and grace, her heels clicking softly across the hardwood floor. Every step echoed louder than the laughter that had mocked the man minutes before. She reached the Steinway and gently touched the keys, the warmth of the last note still clinging to the ivory. Her hands trembled. Then, from the small silver clutch at her side, she pulled a folded piece of parchment. She opened it. The air in the room thickened. "My husband," she said, turning to face the hushed crowd, "wrote this piece 37 years ago. After we lost our daughter." Her voice cracked. "He called it Solace in G minor. He never played it for anyone but me. We never shared it. Not with family. Not even with the conservatory." She held up the parchment. The handwritten score, worn at the corners, water-stained and smudged by time and tears, matched exactly what had just been performed. Not one note was off. Not one rest misplaced. "I kept this hidden," Eleanor whispered. "I don't know how that man knew it. I don't even know who he was. But he played it like it was his own. Like he'd lived every single note." Carson, now flushed red and shaken, stepped forward awkwardly. "Mrs. Braithwaite, are you saying you've never seen him before?" Eleanor shot him a withering look. "No. But I think he's been here far longer than we realize." She turned back to the piano. And beneath the soft glow of the chandelier, the atmosphere shifted from shock to reverence. For in that one performance, a stranger had torn open something buried deep within them all. Outside, the man walked alone. His coat fluttered slightly in the winter breeze. The night was quiet now, almost too quiet after the thunderous emotion inside. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn photograph. It was faded, crinkled at the corners, the colors bleeding together like memories that wouldn't quite stay sharp. A woman and a little girl. Both laughing. Wind blowing their hair across their faces. On the back, written in delicate ink, "Come home to us when you're ready." He stared at it for a long moment, then tucked it back into his coat. A sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb. The driver stepped out. "Mr. Langford, everything go as planned?" James Langford didn't answer immediately. He looked back toward the glowing conservatory windows. The faint sounds of murmuring voices and clinking glass still filtered through the air like fading echoes. "Yes," he said finally. "It went better than I expected." The driver hesitated. "Did they recognize you?" "No," James murmured. "But one day they will." He slid into the back seat of the car, the leather cold against his hands. As the door closed with a soft click, it sealed away the world behind him. The car pulled from the curb and merged into the quiet city traffic. James rested his forehead against the cool glass window, watching the city blur by. Lights. People. Lives. Moving on. No one knew that the man once hailed as the visionary tech genius, philanthropist, and billionaire had walked among them. That he'd vanished not because of scandal, or exile, but heartbreak. He'd lost them. Elaine. Grace. His wife and daughter had boarded a private plane 3 years ago. A routine trip. Weather turned. A malfunction. And just like that, they were gone. James hadn't boarded with them that day. He'd stayed behind, trapped in a boardroom meeting he thought was too important to miss. The guilt had eaten him alive. He gave everything away. Not his money, that came later. He gave away his name, his world, his purpose. He disappeared. Moved into a small apartment above a bookstore. Started going by Lawrence. Walked to parks in the morning, sat by pianos in train stations at night. No one asked questions. He liked it that way. Until last week. When he saw the name Eleanor Braithwaite on the Gala invitation. And the theme of the fundraiser, rebuilding music programs for children in grief. His daughter's dream. So James didn't come as a donor. He came as a man with something to give, something sacred. Not money. Not status. A song. Back at the conservatory, Roger Ellington stood beside one of the event planners, her fingers flying across a laptop. Check the VIP list, he whispered urgently. Every guest. Security footage. There must be something. The screen lit up. A name appeared next to an encrypted code used for private entrance. James Langford. Registered anonymously. Donor, Langford Holdings LLC. Contribution, $10 million. Roger's knees nearly buckled. Oh my God, he muttered. We laughed at a billionaire. No, Eleanor said calmly from behind him. You mocked a father. The planner looked up from the screen. Do you think he'll come back? Eleanor's eyes lingered on the piano. I don't think he ever left. It began with a ripple. Late that night, well after the gala crowd had dissipated and the catering trucks had pulled away from the conservatory's marble steps, a single video appeared online. The uploader didn't add a description. No hashtags. No location. Just a title. Unknown man plays forgotten song, entire room transforms. The footage was grainy but intimate. Shaky at first, filmed quietly from behind a towering flower arrangement near the stage. But the sound? It was breathtaking. Every note that man had played rang clear and true through the phone's modest microphone, as though the universe had leaned in to listen. And so did everyone else. By morning, the video had 1 million views. By noon, 10. Comments flooded in from around the world. I don't know this piece, but it made me cry. My father used to play something like this when Mom was sick. Haven't heard it since. This man isn't playing music. He's releasing ghosts. Within hours, reaction videos popped up from musicians, veterans, grief counselors, composers. A voice teacher in Toronto called it the most honest musical performance of the last decade. A mother in Oregon said her autistic son hadn't spoken in weeks, until he heard the song and whispered, "Play it again." But the real moment came just after noon, when someone posted a side-by-side comparison between the live performance and a digital reconstruction of Samuel Braithwaite's never-published Solace in G minor. The two were identical. Note for note. Breath for breath. Eleanor saw the video just after finishing her tea. She sat in her study, the parchment copy of the song folded neatly beside her. The screen lit her face in the morning glow. She didn't move. Didn't speak. She just listened. When the final note faded, she whispered aloud to no one. He was never trying to perform. He was trying to say goodbye. Then she picked up the phone and dialed an old friend. Harold, she said. It's Eleanor. I need a favor. He was a retired conductor. Once of the London Symphony. Now mostly forgotten except by those who truly knew music. I need help finding a man who disappeared in plain sight. James Langford, however, wasn't watching. He was seated at his upright piano in the corner of his quiet apartment above the bookstore. The skylight above let in soft light as dust floated gently over the yellowed keys. He didn't need the internet to tell him what had happened. He'd felt it in the room. He wasn't after fame. He wasn't even after forgiveness. He was just trying to let go. A gentle knock came at the door. Michael, his discreet assistant and closest confidant, stepped in. He held a newspaper in his hand. His face was pale. "You need to see this." James took it, unfolded the front page, and found himself staring at the image. A blurry silhouette of himself at the piano. Headline: "The Billionaire Who Vanished, and Played the World's Heartstrings." He didn't flinch. He only folded the paper again, set it aside, and stared at the piano. Michael hesitated. "There's more." He handed over another sheet, this one printed on thick, elegant paper. James read slowly. It was an open letter, published in the New York Times. Signed, Eleanor Braithwaite. "To the man who played my husband's final song, thank you. You reminded us all that the most sacred gifts come quietly, without demand or reward. Your music was not just heard. It was felt. Deeply. You played my daughter's memory with hands that trembled not from fear, but from truth. And that truth set something inside me free. If you are reading this, come back. Not for applause. Not for recognition. But because the world still needs the music you carry. With love and reverence. Eleanor." James set the letter down slowly. Michael spoke carefully. "Are you going to answer her?" James didn't reply. Not with words. He rose. Walked to the closet. Pulled out a small, velvet-wrapped case. Inside was a manuscript. Handwritten. Unfinished. The last song he began the week Grace died. He'd never played it for anyone. Never even finished writing it. Until now. He placed it gently on the piano, took a long breath, and sat down. That evening, a new video was uploaded to the same anonymous account. No intro. No tags. Just a soft spotlight on a single piano. And then, the music. It began like memory. Unsure of itself. Fragile. Then it grew. Slowly. With aching purpose. It was a lullaby. A hymn. A goodbye. But also, a welcome. The comments came in waves. He's answering her. This isn't just music. It's healing. It feels like someone I lost is talking to me again. Eleanor watched the video from her living room, tears catching in the folds of her cheeks, her hands clasped in reverent stillness. By the end, she was smiling. Across the world, something beautiful had begun. Not a trend. A movement. A remembering. The piece he played that night had no name. But by morning, the world had given it one. Grace's Song. The name spread like candlelight in a dark chapel. Not through headlines, but through hearts. In churches and subway tunnels, music schools and hospital rooms, people played the melody. Imperfectly. Gently. Truthfully. A teacher in Ohio played it for her music class. A retired soldier in Texas wrote online, "This melody got me through a night I didn't think I'd survive." A mother in Oregon said she'd looped the song for her autistic son, and for the first time in 3 weeks, he spoke, "Play it again." No one knew who had written it. But somehow, everyone understood why it had been written. It wasn't about music anymore. It was about memory. And healing. Back in New York, James sat quietly at his upright piano. He didn't check the numbers. He didn't need to. The echo was already inside him. Ava's face stayed with him the most, the little girl at the community center with the scar on her cheek and the trembling fingers. "I didn't know music could feel like this," she'd said. "Like someone's holding your hand, even if no one's there." He remembered that feeling. The absence. The invisible hand you keep reaching for in the dark. And now, a child he barely knew was playing his song in a park, surrounded by strangers who didn't yet understand they were witnessing a resurrection. Ava's teacher, Carmen Silva, uploaded the video. No fanfare. No captions. Just a girl playing with bravery and trembling grace. That clip reached 5 million views in a week. And then, the letters began. Not emails. Not texts. Letters. Folded drawings from children. Notes in crayon. Scribbled messages from hospital beds and shelters. One came from a young girl who said, "My dad cried when you played. I've never seen that." Another read, "Can you teach me too?" The Langford Foundation's inbox crashed under the volume. But James didn't reply to most of them. Except one. Ava. She'd written a second letter. "Dear Mr. Langford. Miss Silva told me who you are. I won't tell anyone if you don't want me to. I'm playing Grace's song at my school concert next week. You don't have to come, but I'll leave the front row seat empty. Just in case. Love, Ava." James folded the letter and held it to his chest. He whispered, "Yes." The auditorium was small. Just folding chairs and a piano that wheezed when the pedal was pressed too hard. Parents came with juice boxes, grocery store flowers, and camcorders too old for their batteries. No security. No fanfare. Just heart. James sat in the front row, dressed in a soft gray sweater and jeans. He looked no different than any other dad there. But inside, his chest felt like a drum made of glass. Then Ava stepped on stage. Her dress was too long. Her shoes squeaked. But when she sat at the piano, she carried herself like a cathedral. She played. And James didn't hear notes. He heard Grace laughing by the lake. He heard Elaine humming in the kitchen. He heard home. When she finished, the room exploded in applause. But James didn't stand. He just looked at her. And she looked back. And in that look was every unspoken thing. Afterward, in the hallway beneath the trophy case, she found him sitting alone. "I'm glad you came," she said. "I wouldn't have missed it." "Will you play again?" she asked softly. "In front of people?" James looked at her. Thought of all the years he'd hidden. The music he'd buried. "Maybe," he said. "But only if you play with me." She beamed. 3 weeks later, James Langford walked onto a grand stage at a benefit concert organized by Eleanor Braithwaite herself. The audience? The same people who once mocked him. But this time, they stood when he entered. Not to applaud. But because some things demand reverence. Beside him sat Ava. Tiny hands. Big heart. Together they played Grace's song, reimagined as a duet. When the last note fell, no one clapped. They just wept. Eleanor stood, tears in her eyes, hands at her heart. Backstage, Carmen Silva sobbed into her scarf. But James didn't bow. He didn't speak. He took Ava's hand, and led her quietly off the stage. Because sometimes, the softest exits are the loudest answers. Backstage, Ava exhaled like someone who had just finished crossing a tightrope in the wind. She clutched her water bottle with both hands, cheeks flushed, eyes wide with nervous joy. "I thought I was going to faint," she whispered. James handed her a towel. "You didn't. Was I okay?" He crouched beside her, his voice softer than applause. "You were the bridge." Ava tilted her head, confused. "What do you mean?" James looked at her as if seeing something she didn't know she carried. "You took something broken and helped it carry people across." She didn't speak, just blinked hard and looked down. Her hands were trembling again, but not from fear. From something closer to purpose. Outside, a reporter was pushing against the door. "Mr. Langford, just one question. Why the mystery? Why the disguise? Why now?" James looked toward the sound but didn't move. Instead, he helped Ava into her coat and reached for his. They slipped quietly into the hallway, bypassing cameras and noise. He had no answers for headlines. No quotes for sound bites. He had a song. And that had been enough. The next morning, Eleanor Braithwaite stood in the old cemetery where her husband Samuel was buried. The marble headstone was simple, elegant. His name. His years. And the inscription. Even if the music ends, I'll still be listening. She laid a copy of the concert program beside the grave, a quiet offering. Her hand lingered on the page, fingers tracing the ink, as though whispering, "We heard him. We remember." When she returned to her car, James was waiting in the passenger seat. He sat still, eyes on the empty chapel across the road. "I brought it," she said, sliding into the driver's side. She handed him the original manuscript of Solace in G minor, Samuel's inked, tear-stained original. James took it in his hands as if holding something alive. "I thought it was finished," he murmured. "It's not," Eleanor said. "There's more to say now." They drove in silence, golden afternoon light drifting through the windshield. The city hummed outside. A world still turning. Still needing something more than noise. That evening, James sat at his piano with both manuscripts open before him, Samuel's and his own. The melodies wove together like two separate griefs forming a single thread. He wrote through dinner. Through sunset. Through the still hours of the night. And by dawn, it was done. He called it Hymn for the Unspoken. 3 days later, Eleanor hosted a private performance in the conservatory's music hall. No press. No donors. Just a small circle of family, friends, and those who had truly listened from the beginning. James played the completed piece. The music didn't rise with fanfare. It breathed. It mourned. It forgave. And when the final note dissolved into the air like incense in a cathedral, James stood, not to leave, but to speak. "My daughter once asked me to finish a song I started. I told her I didn't know how. But she believed I would. Tonight, I believe it, too." He turned to Ava. "And next time, we'll write something new." She smiled, the way only children and survivors do, like light finally returning through the cracks. Outside, snow had begun to fall. Soft flakes drifting onto the marble steps, dusting the conservatory roof, resting gently on the shoulders of those who exited quietly into the night. Inside, Eleanor remained seated. Her hand pressed lightly to her heart. Not clapping. Just remembering. It began with a memory. Then became a movement. Now, it was a place. 2 weeks after the private performance of Hymn for the Unspoken, James Langford stood in the doorway of the lake house. The same one he hadn't stepped foot in since the accident. The same one where his daughter Grace once traced doodles in the window condensation, and Elaine hummed her lullaby while folding laundry in the sunroom. No one else had been here. Not staff. Not trustees. He'd locked it for years, not to preserve it, but to avoid it. Until now. The grand piano still sat by the bay window, half covered by a sheet. A pink hair clip rested on the keys, Grace's, just where she'd left it. James knelt, reached beneath the bench, and found them, torn construction paper drawings, crayon stick figures, music notes drawn like little suns. One read, "Me plus Dad equals music." He pressed them to his chest, breath trembling, heart thudding like a slow drum. Then he sat at the piano, removed the cloth, and began to play, not Solace, not Grace's song, not even Hymn for the Unspoken, but the simple lullaby he'd once started for her. The one she asked him to finish. And as he played, the house no longer felt like a grave. It felt like a beginning. 2 days later, the announcement came. A new wing would be built on the lake house grounds. Not a memorial. A sanctuary. A summer camp for children living with grief. Its name. Camp Grace and Solace. No press release. No headlines. But the story traveled anyway. And with it, something rare, hope with roots. Applications poured in. From orphanages, foster homes, war zones, hospitals. From children who had never touched an instrument but had carried grief in their bodies since they could walk. Eleanor pledged the first endowment. Ava, now growing more confident, offered to teach twice a year. Even Carmen Silva wrote a single line. If there's a stool and a broken violin, I'll be there. And then, it bloomed. In Tokyo, a choir turned him for the unspoken into a 200-voice prayer. In Nairobi, a girl played Grace's song on a xylophone made of scrap metal. In Brazil, a child in a coma moved his fingers when the melody played in the ICU. But James didn't see himself in any of it. He saw Grace. He saw Ava. He saw people brave enough to carry music where words had failed. The first buses arrived just after sunrise. Children pressed foreheads to the windows, duffel bags in their laps, eyes wide. They saw cabins under tall pines. A lake still wrapped in mist. A field with worn benches. A small chapel that wasn't for prayer, but for song. James stood near the flagpole, hands in his pockets, sweater loose around his shoulders. He watched them file out, some with excitement, others with fear. Most, with something hidden behind their eyes. He knew that look. Ava stood beside him, clipboard in hand, hair tied up in a defiant braid. Carmen waved from the music hall steps. Camp was in session. After lunch, they gathered in the chapel for their first meeting. Ava spoke first. "We don't expect you to be good," she said. "Or ready. Or even to play." She stepped aside, sat at the piano, and began to play, not perfectly, not powerfully, but honestly. Broken chords. Wandering melody. Her own confession in notes. Then Carmen joined with her violin. And together, they filled the space with a song that didn't say, "Look at me," but "I see you." One by one, the children came forward. Some just closed their eyes. Some cried. Some tapped the beat softly against their knees. But when Ava stopped playing, no one clapped. They just sat, together. And for many of them, that was already more than they dared to expect. Later that evening, as dusk curled over the lake, James sat on the dock, watching ripples in the water. A soft wind played with the hem of his coat. He hadn't noticed the footsteps behind him. "You came," said a quiet voice. He turned. Margot. Elaine's sister. They hadn't spoken since the funeral. She had blamed him then. And he hadn't disagreed. Now she stood, older, tired, holding a photo in her hand. "I never hated you," she said. "I just didn't know where to put the pain." He swallowed. "I blamed myself. Every day. I know." They both looked out at the lake. It shimmered with the last light of day. She handed him the photo. It was Grace and Ava. Matching dresses. Playing at the Gala years ago. Laughter caught mid-motion. "She'd want you to keep going," Margot said. He didn't reply. He didn't have to. They sat in silence. Not empty silence. But the kind that holds something sacred. The final day of camp arrived with a hush. Not sadness, something quieter. Like the stillness before dawn, before a candle is lit. The pine trees swayed in slow rhythm, and even the birds seemed to sing a little softer. Children walked slower to breakfast. Counselors whispered instead of called out names. It was as if they all sensed it, they had changed, and soon they'd have to carry that change back into the world. James stood at the chapel doors, hand resting gently on the frame. Inside, mismatched chairs faced the small ivy-framed stage. At its center, a single grand piano. On the bench, a soft linen-covered journal, blank and waiting. Each child had written inside that book throughout the week, a lyric, a single note, a drawing, even just a fingerprint. No names. No rules. Just the sound of hearts learning to breathe again. Ava placed the final program on the last chair, her sunflower pin catching the morning light. She met James' eyes and gave him a look that needed no words. They were ready. At 10 a.m., the concert began. But there were no suits. No cameras. No speeches. The best seats belonged to the campers. James stood quietly and nodded to Ava. She stepped forward. "We all came here with something we didn't want to carry alone," she said. "And we didn't fix anything. We didn't cure anything. But we learned how to listen. To ourselves. To each other. To the sound grief makes when it finally finds a voice." She stepped aside. James sat at the piano. Ava beside him. Together, they began to play. It was something new, drawn from Grace's song, Solace in G minor, and Hymn for the Unspoken, but it had evolved. It had room for joy now. For bravery. For beginning again. As the second movement unfolded, one by one, the children rose. Each child walked forward and played a single note they had chosen during the week. One note. A voice. A confession. A heartbeat. And as those notes formed a fragile, imperfect, utterly beautiful circle of sound, the chapel became something more than a room. It became a memory being rewritten. A small boy named Emil sat beside Ava at the end. He struck a trembling F key, then looked at James. James nodded gently. Emil played 2 more notes, and Ava followed. Then James. A trio. A conversation. And when the last note faded, no one clapped. They just breathed. Deeply. Like something inside had finally been exhaled. Then Ava stood again. "There's one more piece." She stepped back. James pulled a folded letter from his coat pocket. Elaine's handwriting. He placed it on the stand and began to play the final piece. Not for the public. Not for legacy. For her. The letter's words rolled through the melody like scripture whispered through stained glass. "James, if you ever find this, don't disappear. Don't turn our silence into your grave. Grace would want you to finish the song. I want you to live inside it. We're still here. You just have to listen." The notes rose. Not triumphant, but true. When it ended, James rested his hands on the keys. Stillness. Breath. Reverence. Then, humming. From the back of the room, a young girl began to hum the melody. Another voice joined. Then another. And the chapel, once heavy with sorrow, began to glow with song. Not perfect. But whole. Outside, the snow had stopped. The sky opened above Camp Grace and Solace in a vast wash of blue, and the lake shimmered like a mirror. Children ran across the lawn. Some skipping. Some twirling. James stood near the edge, watching. Ava ran up beside him. "Where to now?" she asked. He looked toward the horizon, the light soft on his face. "Anywhere there's silence." She grinned. "So we can fill it?" He shook his head gently. "So we can listen." And together they walked, not toward an end, but into the next song, waiting patiently to begin. What began as a stranger sitting at a piano became a melody that healed the world. This isn't just a story about music, it's about grief, forgiveness, and the quiet bravery of those who choose to keep listening. As Eleanor Braithwaite once said, the most sacred truths are not shouted. They are played. If this story moved you, please subscribe to True Echo, where every week we share stories that remind us of who we are, and who we still have the chance to become. Comment below, what moment hit you hardest? And share this video with someone whose silence you've never stopped hearing.